So I just got back from the Worm Business Conference at the Arizona Worm Farm in Phoenix, and I've had a lot to think about since then. When I was there, I spoke about marketing and profit boosting strategies I've used in my own business, and I got to spend a lot of time with different folks, most of whom haven't started their businesses yet, but had some sort of idea of what they wanted to accomplish. I spoke along with Zach Brooks, who owns Arizona Worm Farm, and Christy, who owns Black Diamond Vermicompost. We're all in the worm space, but we all have such different businesses from one another. Now, the people that were here were definitely not the who's who of the worm breeding and vermicomposting world. The biggest businesses out there actually keep to themselves, and they don't really attend information sharing events like this. So it got me thinking that for those of you who are interested in business, it would be pretty helpful for me to maybe categorize the kinds of businesses that I've seen in the past and give you some differing business models that you can ponder yourselves. The one thing that almost all these businesses have in common is that they're bootstrapped, meaning that they aren't backed by investors. These are folks who funded their own growth, took their own risks, and kind of figured it out as they went along. There's no blueprint that any of us followed to get where we are. We adjusted, we adapted, we pivoted, whatever buzzword you want to use to transform our businesses into something that we can be proud of. So some business models are expensive to start, but can provide the highest upside to the business owner. Other businesses are low cost and low risk, but might have limited upside. Others, like my business model here at the Urban Worm Company, are low risk, low cost, kind of low margin sometimes, but can actually have a pretty high upside. And I've lumped these businesses into 4 different categories with the understanding, and this is important, that some of these businesses are going to occupy more than one of these categories at the same time. And you can borrow techniques from one business model and use it in your business model. Make sure to like this video, hit subscribe to the channel, and stick around to the end where I recommend what I would do if I were in your shoes. All right, so let's get into it. Traditional farms. Number 1, the most intuitive business model out there is the traditional farm. When most newbies talk about starting a business, they're kind of thinking about this path. These are businesses who are simply in the business of making worms, worm castings, extracts, or other soil amendments. They often sell in small quantities online, but they often tend to sell larger quantities to retail or commercial buyers. Here's some examples of farms with a singular focus. You've got Worm Power in Avon, New York that makes worm castings and extracts using a really tightly managed process of composting separated dairy solids before vermicomposting them in one of their massive continuous flow bins. Worm Power sells their solid worm castings, but in the past few years, they've kind of moved away from that into extract production, which can be very profitable. Terravesco in Sonoma Valley, California closed up shop last year, but they were another example of a traditional producer who focused narrowly on both worm castings and extract. The Worm Farm in Durham, California is a pretty famous farm that does most of its business selling mixed soils for California-based cannabis growers. The Arizona Worm Farm, who hosted that conference I talked about a couple minutes ago, is also a traditional producer. They have a pretty diverse business though, with composting, vermicomposting, worm breeding, black soldier fly breeding, and market gardening. But they also, I believe, still do most of their sales in mixed soils. Now, the pros of these businesses is that they have very high upside, but there's a huge downside. Starting a business in your garage, basement, or even a barn like mine is fine, but you won't grow rich selling the worm castings or worms that you're gonna make out of a garage. You need land and you need equipment, and you need to pay the ongoing expense for people to work that farm. The Arizona Worm Farm, for instance, is going to do over $2 million in revenue in 2025, but they have a payroll of over $750,000. And I know Zach has said that it's kind of tough for him to sleep at night knowing that. These are costly businesses to start and maintain, and that's what I see as the biggest downside. All right, you also have what I like to call niche farms. These are smaller, even more locally focused businesses who often need to have a diverse business stream. They sometimes work with commercial and residential customers to pick up their organic waste, which is typically food scraps, and they're normally paid to do that. They compost it on site and then vermicompost some or maybe all of the composted waste. These folks are often really active on social media too, and they're gonna hold paid workshops every now and then to help educate the public and build their businesses. They're active in farmers markets where they can sell their castings, their worms, worm tea, and other products directly to the end user, and they do so pretty profitably. Their unit costs, which is basically the cost to create a pound of castings or a pound of worms, are much higher than a traditional farm, but they're overall much less expensive to run. The farms are less expensive to run, and they're often run as home businesses. These businesses are typically higher margin, but they also have kind of a low ceiling on how big the business can grow unless they're willing to take on debt and risk to buy larger equipment or move into a larger space, or both. Black Diamond Vermicompost, Christy's company, is a larger version of this sort of niche farm. And the owner, Christy, has really carved out a nice niche for herself in the business. And this is great for her and her husband. They're using mid-scale continuous flow-through operation, basically two 40-foot CFTs. They might have added more. but they're doing this in Paso Robles, California. They've got a really nice business. Christy sells to vineyards and at farmers markets and gets top dollar for her castings and teas, which is important since her operation isn't super big. Okay, resellers and e-commerce businesses. These businesses try to cast kind of a wide net using online content like blog posts, YouTube videos, social media, and email marketing in the hopes that some of these folks will make an online purchase of a product. And if this sounds familiar, this is exactly what the Urban Worm Company is. We started in 2014 as a blog and did nothing but blogging and sending out the occasional email newsletter with a minimal amount of e-commerce sales for about 4 years until I launched the Urban Worm Bag, which really helped differentiate us as a company. COVID hit a couple years later and we tripled our business in less than a year. And each year since then, we've actually seen modest growth ever since the pandemic ended. Almost all of our sales are online, and the ones that aren't are just local pickup customers who found us online. So the Urban Worm Bag, our Cocoa Core, worm blankets, and our soil thermometers are our products, and we have them manufactured overseas. But we use a variety of vendors for our worms and a single partner for each of our worm castings and biochar products. We used to produce worm castings themselves, but we ended up facing the kind of nice problem of constantly selling out. It just wasn't a great use of my time or the space we have here, so we made the decision to stop producing worm castings ourselves. That was about 2021, and we now work with a trusted partner who can provide almost any amount that we need. And I'd imagine if you looked under the hood of most quote-unquote worm farms out there, you're gonna find lots of folks who kind of fit into this reseller category. They often start a blog or an Instagram account or a YouTube channel, and they evangelize for vermicomposting, which is awesome. Try to teach beginners the basics, which is awesome. But most of these people have a very small worm breeding or vermicomposting operation, and they look bigger online than what they are in real life. So it's not like I invented this concept. A lot of people are out there doing this. So let me start with the downsides of this business model. If you're relying on web content to acquire customers, it can take forever. People rarely buy from brands that they're unfamiliar with at first, and it can take a frustratingly long time for your content to bubble up through the ranks of Google or the YouTube and social media algorithms to achieve any amount of notoriety and online trust. You gotta have some amount of instinct to make content that people want to watch or read. That's kind of difficult, and it can seem pointless to be writing blogs that only your mother and your family reads. And if you sell someone else's product, the margins are going to be lower since you're relying on someone else's investment in equipment and labor in order to make your product. But once you do get traction, it's pretty awesome. That content works to bring in customers and potential customers while you sleep. If you made the choice I did and outsource your production, your sales can actually double without you doubling the amount of time you spend growing worms or making worm castings. Having a large and growing audience that trusts you means you can put out a new piece of content and it has a greater and greater chance of being seen by a larger audience, which can attract you even more customers. It's kind of a flywheel effect. And while this business is low margin, it's much lower in cost and risk to me financially than if I went out and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on my own farm. We're gonna bring in well over $1 million this year. That's revenue, not profit. And that's about roughly half what the Arizona worm farm is projected to do. But we have almost no equipment costs and only 15% of the labor cost. This is a lean business on the profit side and the cost side. And so here's an example of the way I like to make money. Due to our online presence, I can sell a truckload of worm castings, which is 21 tons. I might make $800 to $1,000 on that, but all I had to do was email back and forth with the customer, have a phone call, and in some cases, that's it. I don't need to expend any real time or labor to make that money. In fact, it would have taken me literally close to 1.5 years of doing my own vermicomposting in order to fulfill an order that size. So I'd have lost money doing that. Now I can do bulk and truckload sales all day long, and you can too if you develop your sales channels. All right, consultants, let's move on to these guys. If you have a deep understanding of a topic, whether it's soil health or how to design composting and vermicomposting projects, you might be able to get paid for that knowledge. You can also get paid to analyze people's soil for them. Now, most folks in the worm world have heard of Elaine Ingham, who started the Soil Food Web School, which is a really comprehensive online course that studies the interactions of soil microbes on one another, the effect on nutrient cycling, soil health, and a lot more than that. And students who complete her consultant course can then put their knowledge to use helping others improve their soil. Now, I think the number of people who go on to start successful Soil Food Web consultant businesses is a pretty small percentage of those who pay for a course, but that's beside the point. If you have composting, vermicomposting, or worm breeding knowledge, you can sell that knowledge. One consultant business that I love is Aldea Verde Lombricultura. Sorry for my Spanish there, but it's a Mexico-based consultancy that designs and builds large-scale, and I'd say sometimes massive-scale, composting and vermicomposting operations in Mexico, the Caribbean, and they've started to do this in the US as well. They've set up operations for companies like Patron Tequila and Montelobos Mezcal, which is pretty cool. and hotels in Cancun and Puerto Vallarta as well. Aldea Verde is owned by my buddy Francisco Niembro, and his clients are typically organic waste producers who want to responsibly handle their waste and use the end product in their own operation to reduce dependence on chemical fertilizers. He gets paid for the design, the implementation of that design, and he makes a commission on any equipment that's procured for that operation. And at some point, after the operation's up and running, he shakes hands with the owner, wipes his hands, and he walks away. Now, Francisco's been in the business for a while, and he actually runs what would be considered a large farm himself, so he's still an operator. And Aldea Verde's own farm would be considered a traditional farm if it were a standalone business. Now, the downside of this consultant business model is you've already got to have a working knowledge of composting, vermicomposting, worm breeding, or soil health in order to make this work. And you've got to know how to package that knowledge for a customer. In Francisco's case, he has a very organized way of studying a client situation, designing them a project to suit their needs, and then helping make that project come true. That's no easy task, but it's a great business for Francisco and Aldea Verde. And I would say that if you're just starting out and you have soil microscopy skills, that is a great way of making some money by doing soil analysis for people. You're typically going to find these customers online, although there's probably plenty of ways to find them locally too. All right, so which business model is my favorite? That all depends, but when I consult with people who want to start their own businesses, it typically takes the form of someone wanting to simply produce worms or worm castings to replace some or all of their income, but they never have a real plan of how to get there. And if left to their own devices, they may start with a few buckets or trays in their garage, and that's fine, but they're soon going to realize that a few buckets and trays in their garage isn't going to give them enough product to start a viable business. So they start spending money and time, and they'll often start in the spring. And this is important. They're going to often start in the spring when their enthusiasm is the highest, but by the time they have product to sell, the season has already passed. And they're going to find that there are a lot of folks who just don't want worms or worm castings in the summer or fall, at least compared to the interest that they'd have seen in the spring. So they feel like they failed instead of understanding what really happened. This is somebody who wants to start a traditional or niche farm without understanding A, what it takes to get to significant production, and B, who their customer is or how to market to them. They've spent time and money but have little to no revenue to show for it. This is not what I want for people. So I think most people should do this. Start off as resellers, but borrow some of the local marketing techniques from niche farms in order to get themselves some profitable local sales early. Find yourself a good source of worm castings who can sell you castings for 50 to 60 cents per pound, or maybe even less for local pickup. Or you can buy from us in bulk and get your castings for under 60 cents a pound. And if you're doing truckloads, we can get it in the 30s. So get whatever documentation or test results your provider is going to give you and get their permission to market their castings under your brand. They're not going to have a problem with this. For bulk worm castings, you ought to be able to triple your investment in your product, basically buying your castings for 50 to 60 cents a pound or less, and reselling locally for $1.75, $1.50, $2, somewhere in that range. Maybe even more than that. You want to use a combination of social media and direct outreach to local master gardener groups, farmers markets, boutique farm shops, and small farms to sell your product. I think most of your time should be spent going for local sales, but you might also consider doing some online content. Start a YouTube channel to broaden your reach beyond the local community. This may open you up for more online sales, and at some point you can focus on your own production once you're confident that you can sell your product. Marketing first gives you the opportunity to learn what your market wants, and this information is huge. If you want to sell worm castings locally, but find out there's a massive farm nearby that's going to crush you on price, wouldn't you rather know that before starting to slave away making castings in your garage? Of course you would. If you want to make money with worm castings, you might actually need to ask yourself if you want to be a vermicomposter or have a business. And that was the decision that I had to make. Unless you want to operate unprofitably as a farm for a season or two, the quickest way to a profitable side hustle is to sell someone else's worms or worm castings. Now guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I want you to get value out of my web content, but I do have a course that covers the soup to nuts of the worm business. I'm upfront about the challenges and the opportunities, how to breed worms, compost and then vermicompost organic waste, and more than that. I cover marketing, I give you some bookkeeping advice, and my thoughts on how you can structure your business. You can certainly start and run a business of your own without it, but this course is going to save you hours and hours of learning it on your own. People that choose the advanced tier also get access to a monthly Zoom call where we chat and we share ideas, and these meetings are always a lot of fun. So I would highly suggest giving it a look. Just click this little link up here and it's going to take you to a page where you can learn more and register. And I'll even give 30 30% off to the first 10 people who use the code YT30 for either pricing option. So there's not a set formula for any of this. Some people hate in-person sales and others would rather pound the pavement for hours hustling for sales before they'd ever want to start an Instagram account to generate sales. Some of you have no money to start with and some of you have it coming out of your ears. Either way, I would spend a little time and a little bit of money on marketing your product or service before spending lots of time and lots of money without any real idea of how you'll find the customers who are gonna pay you for your product. So let me leave you with this. Whether you're a traditional farm, a niche farm, a reseller, or a consultant, you should think of sales as being as important or more important than production. If you can't sell your product, it doesn't matter how good it is. So don't bankrupt yourself spending money on CFTs, trommels, and other equipment until you know you can generate income from it. That's it, guys. I hope this was helpful. Please check out the course, hit subscribe on this channel. Hope to see you back soon.